Okay, fine. Let's start then. So this is lecture 2 of the crash course for history of okay, fine. So I hope you remember that what exactly we had been discussing in the last class. So in the last class, we had started discussing about the first topic. There we had been trying to cover the sources, and primarily I talked about the Brahminical sources, and then precisely some of the Brahminical sources, right? Brahminical texts specifically as a source of history. Then we had been talking about the Buddhist sources, their limitations, their limitations and all, right? And then towards the end, we had been even talking about basically some archaeological sources. Fine. Now let's move to the next part. So when it comes to the next part, frankly speaking, we need to talk about basically the foreign accounts. Fine. So we have to talk about the foreign accounts, and again we'll see it briefly because most of the things you must be foreign accounts. So while talking about the sources, I did tell you that actually there are a couple of foreign accounts which are quite helpful for writing the history of India, and these foreign accounts can be divided into couple of categories. The way I was discussing, it is one category that we say the Greek and the Latin account, right? Greek and Latin account, right? Then I talked about the Chinese account. They are very important. Chinese account. So when it comes to the foreign accounts, we mostly talk about these two. We never talk about the other sort of possible sources. But then you should always keep in mind that the other accounts are also there. They could be kept in the category of foreign accounts. That includes Sri Lankan, right? And most importantly, Tibetan accounts. So they could be also incorporated here. But since in our syllabus, these two have been highlighted, and that's how while talking about this, we will also emphasize mostly on the foreign. We'll emphasize mostly on these two accounts which have been given in our syllabus, right? So let us start with the next one, or sorry, the first one, that is the Greek and the Latin accounts, right? Greek and Latin accounts. First of all, the thing that you need to understand, what is the reason because of what so many Greek and the Latin authors had been writing about India. And I think it's a very simple connection because of what they all had been writing. Because India was well connected with the Western world since beginning. You know about Harappan civilization, and you know that Harappan civilization was well connected with the Western world. Mesopotamia is there, Persian Gulf region is there, and that's how I can say that this connection between India and the Western world was there since beginning, and this particular relationship continued for most of the periods. Even after the decline of Harappan civilization, when the Vedic period started in India, at that point of time, let's say we can say for some period of time that there was a break in this particular relationship, but it does not mean that this particular break was longer, and in fact this relationship got finished forever. It is not true. The relationship got connected once again, between the two regions, and that is how India was well connected with the West. Specifically, if we'll talk about the process of state formation in the western part of the western part of India, not Indian subcontinent, basically the West, India's west. So that includes the Greco-Roman Empire, precisely the Greco-Roman Empire. So India was even well connected with this Greco-Roman Empire, and in fact you have seen that some of the invasions took place from their side or from this particular side. And the way the Alexander is coming here, and in fact after the coming of Alexander, somehow more let's say formal interest developed among them, and that's how the early description you start finding from the period of Herodotus only. So you should always remember remember the name of Herodotus, who wrote about Herodotus, who wrote about India for the first time, in the beginning. And Herodotus is basically writing after a couple of invasions had been taking place from this particular site, right? So the way you say, Darius is there, then Xerxes is there, and then finally Alexander is also coming. So these kind of invasions are happening. So whether these invasions were very important or not, that remains a matter of debate, or a subject. It is subject to debate. But then it is definitely true that after these invasions taking place from the northwestern side, the continuous trading relationship got established between the two, and in fact these trading relationship further converts or it transcend into a sort of like political relation, social relation, economic relation, and then maybe like we can say cultural relation also. So these kind of relationship, these kind of relationships are getting established between the two regions, and that's how we can say there was regular interaction going on between the two regions, right? So when people were very frequently coming from that side to this side, now when I'm saying frequently, you should always keep in mind it was not so frequent or easy that anybody who wanted to come to India or vice versa, could have come to India or like gone to Greek Empire, was also not that easy. And that's how only some courageous people were daring to come to India, or let's say some courageous people from India used to go to the Greco-Roman Empire, and that's the rest of the people were quite curious to know about India, which is a common phenomenon. So if you know about a region which is slightly far from you or slightly far away from you, and then you know about couple of things also, such as it's very prosperous, and a different kind of culture is there, or maybe some cultural similarities are there. So basically rest of the people wanted to know about the Indian civilization and culture. That is the reason because of what some of the people have started writing about India, and this particular trend had started with Herodotus, right? But then Herodotus was followed by so many other people, and there is a longer list of such people. There we can talk about Strabo, Nearchus, Arrian, Plutarch, right? And then we can talk about Pliny, then Ptolemy, they all have been writing about India. So there is a longer list of such kind of Greco-Roman authors, those who had been continuously writing about India. That becomes that is the primary reason because of what we can say, that ultimately we find good we find good amount of presence of Indian civilization in the Western writings. That is how it started. But when it comes to all these writings, as I told you, that there is a longer list of such authors, those who have written about India. But then among them, there are few which are very important. So undoubtedly, Herodotus is one of the earliest, not one of the earliest, rather I should say it is the earliest author, Greek author, who had been writing about India. But among them, you all know that the most important is the Megasthenes, right? Megasthenes. He is the most important one after Herodotus, I can say. Then there was another person called as Nearchus. He is also writing a lot about India. And apart from this, we can talk about the people I have given you a longer list, such as Plutarch is there. Plutarch is there. Then Strabo is there, right? And there were so many other people who were also there. But in this particular list, I would like to name of one book that's called as Periplus of Erythraean Sea. You must have heard the name of this particular book. Then you must be knowing about geography. Geography, written by Ptolemy. And then Natural Historica, written by Pliny. Right? These are some very popular authors. They had been writing not only in this period, but even in the later period also, they had been writing. And as I did tell you, that these are some of the important writings. The question is that, if there is a question coming, that how come these Greco-Roman sources are helpful in writing history, right? So, as a source of history, these writings, right, as source of history, source of history, that is the most important question that we need to deal with. Fine. So when it comes to these writings, so they had been highlighting on many areas, right? Again, the same structure we are going to follow, but then maybe the information that you have been providing is more concrete as compared to the previous one, such as the first information that we always talk about is the political information. Fine. So the way I did tell you that to a certain extent, these writings started appearing more only after a couple of invasions started from the northwestern side. That is the reason because of what they had been providing several information, such as if you'll see the early Greek writings, they had been talking about the battle of Hydaspes, the battle of right, the battle of Hydaspes, right? That's a very important battle that was fought between, fought by, against King Porus. So that this is one of the most important historical event that has been referred. But then it is not the only one. If you see the further writings, in that case, you'll find the description of many other kingdoms and their political system. Megasthenes, you all know that he stayed for 3.5 years in Chandragupta Maurya's court, and then he had been providing very valuable information about the court, about their bureaucracy, about their administration, about their city management, about their taxation system. So that is how we come across various such information from their writings. But then the other writings what I had been just now writing just now I had been discussing about, if you see the other writings, in that case some other kingdoms have also been mentioned. And in the other kingdoms we can talk about, such as apart from Mauryans, what I have just now discussed, we can talk about the Saka Chhatrapas, right? Saka Satrapas. Then we can talk about the Satavahanas, and then the Sangam politics or Sangam polity is also being discussed. Chola, Chira, and Pandya. So that's how we can talk about that. They had been writing about providing political details of so many political details of several kingdoms. There were some minor, there were some major kingdoms. In fact, when it comes to the Saka Chhatrapa, frankly speaking, the Greco-Roman sources remain the primary sources to write about the Saka Chhatrapa kingdom, whereas Indian sources are more or less silent, except few inscriptions and the coins. Fine. So that's how we come across some political information. Now, among them, undoubtedly, Megasthenes is the most important one, where since he stayed in Indian court for such a longer period of time, and that's how he was in a better condition to provide information about the Indian political system. And that's the reason because of what he had really or literally provided some very good information, such as you can talk about the court conspiracies, the minute things of the administration, such as what are the various bureaucrats, what are their functions, right? How the administration was divided into several units and so on. So that's the reason because of what in this particular thing, Megasthenes undoubtedly remains the most important one. Then hereafter we can talk about what is the other information being provided. So yes, economy should be the second uh, priority for us. Why economy? Because majority of these sources what I have been discussing, they are giving information about the economy of this particular period. Now Megasthenes, or coming of Megasthenes to India, or his staying in Mauryan court, may be a political affair, because that Chandragupta Maurya defeated Seleucus Nicator, one of the military commanders of Alexander. And thereafter, since Seleucus Nicator was defeated, and then hereafter you can find that the sending of ambassadors to these kingdoms, they became a sort of common phenomena or common tradition. That's how Megasthenes is coming into India. So when Megasthenes is coming to India, as I told you that it is a political affair. But when you talk about, or when we'll talk about other writers, right, they were mostly writing about India with respect to the economy of this particular period. The way that West was one of the biggest importer of various valuable stuff, right? So that includes cotton, that includes cotton clothes basically. Later on, this even includes silk clothes also. Then you can talk about some other manufactured items in India. So since they were the major importers of Indian products, that is the reason they had been giving ample amount of information of basically trade and commerce. So undoubtedly, among their information, or the information that had been provided by them, trade and commerce is the primary one. But when it comes to the trade and commerce, they had more or less provided every possible details, such as what details may be important in trade and commerce, such as what are the centers of trade, what were the manufacturing centers, what commodities were being imported, what was the institution matlab what were the various institutions which were handling this particular trade, such as guilds and all. So they have provided valuable information with respect to trade, with respect to trade, and they are literally amazing information what they have provided. So yes, with respect to trade and commerce, they have provided very diverse and vivid information. But at the same time, we can say they have been providing information even on agriculture also. And when it comes to agriculture, there are two reasons because of what they have been providing information on agriculture. The first reason that the majority of those products, right, or majority of those things which were being exported outside, they were mostly taken from the agricultural products. That is one thing. And the second thing, the scholars or the travelers not travelers, it won't be correct to say, the ambassadors like Megasthenes who stayed in India for such a long period of time, he observed, he had a natural interest in these kind of things, and that's the reason he had provided that what are the important crops being produced by the Indians, commercial crops the food crops and several other things. So this is how we do get information even on the economic sort of thing. Okay. Acha, when it comes to the trade, they have even provided information on the trade routes also, trade routes, the ships, the ship building industry. So that's how we find these kind of good information. Natural resources, they have even provided information on natural resources. Natural resources are gold, silver, and some other stuff. The coinage culture, they have even highlighted importance of this also. So that's how good amount of information we do find on this, right? Then we can say the social and the cultural. Let's talk about the social information. Now the people, those who visited India, right, they are undoubtedly providing different kind of information. But then those who never visited India, they were not in a condition to write a lot about basically society at that point of time. But then, as you all know, that people like Megasthenes stayed in India, that's how he was in a better condition to provide information on caste, on society. And he talks about various institutions prevailing in society. So such as he gives a sort of comparative study of the Greek society and the Indian society. He talks about the caste system, he talks about the Varna system, he talks about the marriage institution, and there are several other institutions which were there. And at the same time, I can say they have provided information on the cultural dimension also. Again, I'll majorly give credit to Megasthenes for providing cultural information, since he stayed in India for such a longer period of time, and that's how he could observe the Indian society in a better way. And that's the reason, apart from the social institution, he's even talking about various fairs, festivals being celebrated in India, the clothing pattern, the fooding habits, right? The various taboos prevailing in the society, the various practices which were there in the society, these kind of cultural informations had been also provided by. So that is how we can say these kind of foreign accounts, specifically Greek and Roman accounts or Greco-Roman accounts, they have provided good information on India. Okay, fine. Even they had been making the cross cultural interactions of the connections also. What do I mean by cross cultural interaction? As I did tell you, that a general phenomena was there among these people, or general trend was there among these people, that they had been making the comparison, right, with each other. Well, they had been comparing the Greek society with the Indian society. So this is how we can say they have undoubtedly provided very good information. Fine. But then you should also know about the limitations of these Greco-Roman accounts, right? So let us talk about limitations also. Now, you might have seen certain questions directly based on the limitations, right? Because yes, at one point of time they seem to be very good source, but on this at the same time I must tell you that they did have so many limitations also. But then you cannot mention any limitation for the sake of writing. Rather, you have to be very particular about this. So what are the limitations? So first I'll say the ethnocentric biases. Ethnocentric biases. Now, what is this ethnocentric biases? Basically, when it comes to their view about Indian culture, they have always tried to observe the Indian culture with the, I can say, with the Greek lens. Fine. So I think it's quite obvious also that we are brought up in a particular culture. So whenever we see other culture, what does not match with us, that is always presented in a very negative way. In fact, if you'll be also asked to write about any particular culture which is like not similar to you, in that case he'll try to make a certain reservations would be there for your own culture. That happens very frequently, and that is the reason because of what I I won't exaggerate that. I won't not exaggerate. I won't emphasize a lot on that, right? So this is one of the primary bias they had. What is the next one? The next one was that it used to be the second hand or based on hearsay. ठीक है? There is a longer list of the Greek or there is a longer list of these Greco or Greek and Roman people, those who had been writing about India. Just now I had been discussing about that, like the way you talk about basically Megasthenes, Herodotus, Nearchus, Plutarch, Strabo, Arian, and so many, right? But then out of these people, how many have really visited India? Frankly speaking, we do not find that more than two or three people ever visited India. So if there are 10 to 12 major Greek writers, out of them only these two or three have come to India, rest of them never came to India. So if they never came to India, then there were two questions. If they're not coming to India, then what are the reasons because of what they had been writing about India? That is a genuine question. सो अगर आप आ ही नहीं रहे इंडिया पे, तो आपको क्या है, मतलब व्हाट इज ड्राइविंग यू बेसिकली टू राइट अबाउट इंडिया? सो दैट आंसर आई हैव ऑलरेडी गिवन. Since the Greek people were so much interested to know about the Indian people, culture, civilization, and so on, that is the reason because of what it was a lucrative idea to write about India. I hope you all can understand that once Sole was made, like there were several films were made in this particular line, such as Sole was a super duper hit, and that's how China Gate, and then there were so many other films. I don't remember even the names of these films. So whatsoever popular films are there, you'll find that there were so many people tried to create the films in the same line. The basic theme remains very pretty similar. So what happens here, as I did tell you that these couple of people came to India, they wrote about India. Why? It was liked by the people. That is the reason because of what even those who never came to India, they also started writing about India. So the question is that if they were not, it is one of the greatest limitations that they never provided the information what they personally experienced, right? Then the second question is also coming, if they were not coming in personally, in that case, how did they collect the information? And that is why we can say that they were mostly relying on the second hand information or the hearsay. This question had been asked once also to you. So since that society was interested, they preferred to write, but then they needed to collect information. So what may be the best way? So the traders and the travelers, those who have been coming, those who had been coming to India, now they tried to collect information from them only, and that's how we can find much disparity or discrepancy in the information provided by them, right? There are multiple discrepancy that we'll talk about, right, later on. But then yes, of course, there were so many problems were there, and there are several such information had been provided by them which does not have any validity. That doesn't sound even true also, but then these kind of information had been also provided by them. So we can say they relied more on the some other sources to write about India, but then those people were not responsible that whatever they have been telling to these writers, whether this would be accurate, otherwise there should be some wrong perception created for India, but then they never focus on that. Okay, fine. The third important limitation is exaggeration, right? Now why exaggeration? uh, I hope इसको मैं कैसे बताऊं अभी, ठीक है? एग्जैजरेशन का सिंपल मतलब होता है, लेट्स से अगर आप चांद पे गए घूमने के लिए, आप मान लीजिए बहुत रेयर है, चांद पे लोग नहीं जाते, आप थोड़ा एग्जैजरेट करेंगे चीज़ों को वहाँ पे कि यार ऐसे होता है, वहाँ पे ऐसे होता है, ठीक है? द थिंग्स हैपन, लाइक वो होता है, जैसे बहुत लोग होते हैं जो फॉरेन ट्रिप पे नहीं जा पाते, लेकिन जो लोग फॉरेन ट्रिप पे जाते हैं वो बहुत कुछ जो है बड़ा बताते हैं, थोड़ा बढ़ा चढ़ा के भी बताते हैं, बिकॉज until and unless they are doing this, like people won't listen to them, ठीक है? तो वो अपनी बात को थोड़ा मतलब ज्यादा तवज्जो दिलवाने के लिए, to get attraction of the people, sometimes they वर like exaggerating the thing. And sometimes these exaggerations went beyond a limit, right? I'm just giving you one or two examples to make you understand, such as they have described the gold digging ants. वो कहते हैं कुछ ऐसी चींटियां होती हैं इंडिया में, जो चींटियां जो है वो सोने की खोज करती है, ठीक है, और वो निकाल लेती है सोना खोद के. Now that sounds to be quite awkward, but then they have written about it, ठीक है. या फिर like they have discussed about a legendary tribe which always used to had one eye. So it's like that only, right? The way when we try to describe alien, तो हमारे अपने perceptions होते हैं alien को describe करने के लिए, कि उसके कान बड़े होते हैं या एक ही आंख होता है या एक ही कान होता है, और that's something very unusual. लेकिन if it is like that, अगर आप बोलेंगे कि जो है आप इंडिया आए थे और इंडिया में भी आपको जो है लोग मिले जिनकी दो आंखें होती थी, दो कान होते थे, एक मुंह होता था, सब पीपल वुड से तो फिर तो वैसे ही है, इंडिया की तरह है, मतलब ग्रीक एम्पायर की तरह है या ग्रीक लैंड की तरह ही है. So what is unique about that, right? So what is unique about that? In order to make it unique, like these people have started exaggerating the thing. That's how certain wrong information had also provided by them. Okay. Then it goes to next one. They always had very limited understanding. Limited understanding. Now, there might be multiple reasons because of what they all had limited understanding. As in, when it comes to those who never came to India, their information was second hand and was based on hearsay. That's how it is quite logical that it is quite logical that their information would be having certain problems, or maybe their understanding would be pretty less. But even those people who came to India, such as Niarchus came to India, Megasthenes came to India, he stayed here for such a long period of time. Even the information provided by them had certain problems. The point is that when you are staying in a particular place for a very minor period of time, now this is not sufficient to understand the society in in a beautiful manner. When we are or some outsider is coming to India and then somebody sees Indian society, it is not that easy for him or her to understand it all of a sudden, because the way caste, varna, and several such social institutions are there. So you need time to understand understand the development or the evolution of these institutions. That's how we can say they have been providing sometimes strong information, such as for Megasthenes, maybe the ideal case to discuss about this, such as Megasthenes talks about the seven castes in India, right? Now it is it is definitely wrong, because in India, as you all know, that either four varnas are there, or else numerous castes were there, but it does not fit anywhere. But then probably he had been providing this information for this reason, that if you see the Greek society, it was divided Greek society was divided into seven parts. So basically, it was more occupational based differences or the division which was there in the Greek society that inspired. And in fact, in India also you can find very similar kind of difference. And in fact, you need a great amount of expertise to understand Indian society. How come these people were could understand in just a couple of years? So seven castes are there, or such as slavery is missing in India, right? Slavery is missing in India. Or let's say, he says about famines, that he says that famines are missing in India. So that's how he had been providing information in which we can see that they had been talking about several such things which were not present in India, or they presented in a wrong way. It shows clearly there's limited understanding of Indian society, because as you all know, I have already given you the reason because of what they had been they were doing these kind of mistakes. So that is also one of the greatest limitations, that they always had a limited understanding. And it is all about all about the differences between the non-presence of these people, right? That is one thing. The religious problems, or the religious barricades, cultural barricades, and then most importantly the linguistic barricades, because of what they were not in a condition to write about this. Okay, fine. So that's how we can say that these are the Greek sources, or Greco-Roman sources. These are the positive things. These are the negative things. Yet they remain very valuable source to write about Indian history. Why? Because these are these kind of sources had been highlighting on those things which were unfortunately remained ignored, right? Or they were not paid proper attention by the Indian authors. Probably there was a reason in India that these kind of things were not considered to be so important, because if you see India of that particular period, you'll find that Indians had been mostly paying attention to the supernatural or religious or metaphysical thing rather than the practical thing. And you'll be completely shocked by knowing this fact, that in fact there is no writing, contemporary writing in India, which wrote about Chandragupta Maurya or even Bindusara also for that matter. Like, we never knew that there was a ruler. Well, through these sources, we never knew about, like, there's a very popular ruler who led the foundation of the Mauryan Empire. That's called as Chandragupta Maurya. And later on, right, from the Sri Lankan text and then like, Greco-Roman text, we could understand that there was one ruler ruling in India. Like, he was the founder of Mauryan Empire, and he was Chandragupta Maurya. Such as, like, if you'll see those writers, Greek writers, they had been writing about one ruler in India that's called as Sendrokotas or Indrokotas. And then later it was realized that Sendrokotas or Indrokotas was no one but Chandragupta Maurya only. In the same way, Bindusar had also been incorporated by them in like a massive way in their writing. But on the other hand, Indian sources have outrightly ignored them. That's how, like, the situation was there. So Bindusar, like, who was also called as Amitra Ghat, there was one name of his was Amitra Ghat, and that's how, like, there's another name which appears in the Greek writing that's called as Amitrochates, right? So later on, when Kalidas is writing, one of his novels where Bindusar remains the, or Bindusar was the central character. So there he called him as Amitraghat. Then only it was realized that probably they were willing to write about Amitrochates. That's how, like, they are writing about them, right? So that you should always keep in mind that there are a couple of in such informations or couple of such historical events were there in India. Probably they remain, or they might be remain unnoticed for a very long period of time if these Greek writings won't be there. That is the beauty of these Greek writings. At the same time, the another great beauty that I should talk about, that when it comes to Periplus of Erythraean Sea, then Natural Historica by Pliny, and then Geography by Ptolemy. So these are those writings which have been providing extensive detail of the trade going on between India and the Greco-Roman empires, and no Indian source have ever provided such an extensive detail. The way I was discussing it, they had been more or less writing or giving information of all the dimensions of this trade going on in India. That is the beauty of these, like like, these sources. That is the reason, because of the numbers of, like, historians have given the importance of this. But among them, like, there are two names I'll be just giving you that you should try to write. One is Romila Thapa. So she writes a lot about this. Romila Thapa. But there was one scholar who is the most important one, is Thomas Trotman. Thomas Trotman, sorry, double M is there. Thomas Trotman. तो इन्होंने, like, Thomas Trotman has showed the significance of the Greek accounts for their vivid description of Indian society. But then at the same time, he says that there should be a critical approach towards, like, these sources, because there are certain problems, specifically like the, because of this cross cultural interaction and then cultural biases, and that's how he requests people to be little bit cautious while using them as a source of history. But then at the same time, he, like, glorifies, or he, like, talks about the importance of this also. So that is all about this Greco-Roman writings. I think this much information is sufficient. Now let's go to the another, like, let's go to the another side, and then it comes to the Chinese sources, right? So Chinese sources, as you all know, that there are two most important persons were there, or travelers were there. One was Fahian, right, and the second was Wensang. So Fahian and Wensang were the two most important fellows which were there. Okay, just a second. There was a question. Can we say that the foreign sources are better than the Indian ones? Okay, I would come to these kind of comparative things. Like, I would like to answer this towards the end. Are you there? No. Okay, fine. Fine. Right. So Fayan and Wenzel. Look, ultimately, whatsoever information they had been providing, that is not very tough to know. Now, both of them, and in fact, if you include some other Chinese travelers coming to India, such as It Singh is also there, uh, they were mostly the Buddhist travelers, right? And they were coming to India with an objective of studying the Buddhist texts in India, or translating them, or compiling them to take away with them. That was the basic purpose. That is the reason because of what they were more interested in religion rather than any other domain. So that's how when it comes to either Fayan or Wensang, both of them, right? So the information which has been provided majorly by them was religious information, right? Religious information. And among religion, of course, they have been talking about Buddhism also, Brahmanism also, right? But then their major focus remain in Buddhism. So if you really wish to understand the condition of Buddhism in India during the period of Fayan and Wensang, in that case, as you all know, that one is coming in the Gupta during the Gupta age, or during the Gupta kingdom, and one is coming during the Harshvardhana's period. So there are two different centuries in which they are coming, and in both the periods, what is the condition of Buddhism? What are the various things related to Buddhism? Their practices, their beliefs, their shrines, their texts, they have talked about everything, and that too extensively. When it comes to the condition of monasteries, then a condition of Buddhist monks, condition of Buddhism in India, they have provided information on these things, right? But then, of course, while doing so, they have even emphasized, or they have thrown the light on some other religions present in India, such as they are writing about, such as they are writing about Hinduism, Jainism, and other things also. But this is the major information what they have been providing. Apart from this, we can say they are providing information even on society and culture, right? They have been providing information even on society and culture. And now, why society and culture? Because since they stayed here for such a longer period of time, that is the reason because of what they might have observed the society. And due to couple of reasons, ultimately they had their interaction with Indian society, and that is the reason because of what they have included these kind of things in their writing, such as they are writing about the caste system, they are writing about the Indian the condition of crime in India, punishment in India, the legal system in India, the daily life, and the customs. So that's how they have provided information on that. Then we can talk about the economic and the political observation also. So since they had been traveling most of the time in this, or along with the same routes, which were basically used for the trading purposes or for some sort of transportation, and that's how they have been providing certain information on the trade and then trading routes, and then various port cities also, the land routes as well. So agriculture also they have provided information. They have been even writing about administration, the justice system, these are also one thing that we can talk about. So when it comes to the Chinese sources, they are not very important, like the Greek sources, but yet they have been providing information for these two regions what I have discussed. Okay. When it comes to the limitation of these texts, they do have great limitations. Religious biases is the undoubtedly the most important one. The ethnocentric perspective that was there with that should be there even among even with the Chinese text also, right? Because I have already told you that they were coming from a specific kind of culture, and this culture was also very old culture. So that's the reason because of what I can say they had certain biases also. So these are the certain things that we can talk about. And if it comes to historian, in that case we just need to remember one historian, again the recent one. His call is Tansen Sen. Now he had provided ample amount of information on these Chinese writing, and he glorifies the Chinese writings for understanding the Indian society and culture. And he says categorically that the other sources do not provide this much information the way the Chinese sources are providing information. That is all about these foreign accounts. So the way I did tell you that apart from this, there are two more sort of sources that are three, in fact, I'll say. And what are they? One I told you, the Sri Lankan or Singli text, Sri Lankan, right? Then I told you the Tibetan one, And then the last one I did tell you, the Nepali text. Okay. Frankly speaking, here I do not find any possibility, but then this may be asked in form of question. So I won't complicate it. I'll simply tell you that if any question is coming on the Sri Lankan text, so you know about the expansion of Buddhism into this part, right? The way you see that Buddhism got expanded in this particular area, and after that you can find that there is a longer list of certain texts which have been written, such as, we can talk about Divyavadan, Divyavadan, right? Mahavadan, right? Deepavamsa, Mahavamsa, Mahavamsa. So these are those Buddhist texts what are mostly found in or compiled in Sri Lanka. Now you should understand that at one hand they're important for couple of sources. Why? Sorry, couple of information. So since they are precisely related to Buddhism, and that is how they are majorly writing about Buddhism, and those rulers or political powers either patronize Buddhism, or those who try to suppress Buddhism. दैट इज द सिंपल इक्वेशन. ठीक है, दो ही तरीके की चीजें हैं इंफॉर्मेशन जिनके ऊपर ज्यादा फोकस है इनका. सो दे फ्रैंकली स्पीकिंग डू नॉट राइट अ लॉट अबाउट द इकोनॉमी, सोसाइटी एंड ऑल रेस्ट ऑफ द थिंग. Their major focus was Buddhism, and with respect to Buddhism, whatsoever was fit, they had been describing about that. So there are a couple of contributions of these writings, such as when it comes to Ashokan inscription. Frankly speaking, as you all know that Ashoka has not mentioned his name in most of the inscription except few. So the inscriptions which were deciphered initially, that did not include the name of Ashoka. So basically Devanam Piya or Piyadasi, these are the things which have been mostly written by them. So since they had been using these kind of names, and historians could not understand ultimately these inscriptions were issued by whom. So when it comes to those singly texts, since they have mentioned Ashoka with this name Piyadasi and Devanampiya, then it became more clear that these inscriptions are of Ashoka. Probably not probably. This is how historians were able to figure it out. How come historians were able to figure it out? How come these inscriptions are being issued by Ashoka? At the same time, there's a perception of ending of Buddhism, specifically in the postmodern period of time, and the whole concept of the Brahminical revivalism is ultimately coming from these Sri Lankan texts, including Divyavadan, which is finally, as I told you, that the Nepali version is present to us. So they have been writing about these things, or they have been providing information about these kind of things, and that's how they remain quite helpful for history writing of India also, and they do have great importance. So there was so many concepts were based on these writings, but then you should always keep in mind one thing: ultimately they are full of biases, because as I told you that their writings were completely revolving around Buddhism, and they were not focusing on any other dimension. That remains the greatest limitation of these writings. That is all about all these foreign accounts. Fine. So I have discussed most of the aspects of these foreign accounts, that how it should be understood. That is all about this. Now, as I did tell you that in the last class itself, when it comes to the sources, we'll go for some sort of analytical understanding of the sources also, that could help you either in the regular answers to regular this could help us to make the answers better even in the regular answers, and sometimes there are certain answers which are precisely based on these kind of conceptual ideas or the dimensions. Fine. Look, when it comes to sources, there are some generic things that you should always keep in mind. First of all, when it comes to Indian history writing, in Indian history writing, the literary sources have always been given preference in Indian history writing. Now, if I'll ask this question that why the literary sources have been given so much preference, in that case, the answer is very simple. Because initially, what happened when the Western colonial rule got established in India? So, colonial rule was focusing on the process of translation of many classical Indian texts. And since they needed to prove Indian society as a backward one, as a culturally backward one, or uncivilized, that is the reason because of what? These people That is the reason because of what these people have started using those translation which were mostly done either in Asiatic Society of Calcutta or Asiatic Society of Bombay or Asiatic Society of Great Britain, and then by using these kind of translations they have started writing the history of India in order to prove India as backward, barbaric, uncivilized and so on. That's how the beginning of Indian history writing with a modern perspective started being based on these literary sources, and that further becomes a sort of regular and permanent trend in Indian history writing. And that is how in Indian history writing the major focus has been given on the literary sources. Now, I hope it's quite logical to say that why would a colonial government would invest money into the historical researches or into maintaining that organizations like ASI, Archaeological Survey of India. So though there were some people they pursued, such as James Prinsep was there, and then one of his disciples called as Cunningham. And after the persuasion of this person Cunningham, ASI became functional for some period of time in 1880s. But then after the death of Cunningham, again this organization got this organization was closed. And then further you see that after Cunningham, 1904, 1905, again ASI becomes functional. It's quite logical. क्यों invest करेंगे वो Indian researchers में इतना? So archaeological sources, which is undoubtedly one of the most valuable source for history writing, they have remained or they were perpetually ignored. That is one of the biggest lacuna of Indian history writing. So as I told you that from 1904 or 5, right, 1904 or 5, the archaeological researches started in India. So that is how the incorporation, right, incorporation of these findings started along with the along with the literary sources. Fine. तो उनको अब धीरे धीरे जो है उन लोगों ने इनकॉर्पोरेट करना शुरू किया. But usme bhi there is a catch or there is a problem. Fine. Now what is the problem? Archaeological sources do not speak anything by their own. So interpretation plays very important role. So interpretation is being done by the historians. That is reason number one. The second important thing, that until and unless your science is developed a lot or it's very much developed, which could literally help you in interpreting those archaeological sources, there is no greater use of these archaeological sources. Fine. So since science or technology was not very developed in India, that's reason number one. And the historians, those who are interpreting these archaeological sources, they themselves were quite biased. And that is how even after the coming of archaeological sources, there was no massive change in the history writing or in the trend of history writing. And that's how the problems more or less continues. Again, the situation is changing 1947 onwards when India becomes independent. But then you all know that India was basically a deprived country, and it never had these many resources that it could have, these many resources that it could have spent money on the historical researches and all. And it took time. So as you can see that the process of history writing of India with the modern perspective in the sense started somewhere in 1804 or 5, and then even in 1960s 70s India had been struggling for this. So for last 150 60 years there was a trend of writing the history majorly on the basis of the literary sources. And that's how in India you can find that there are two parallel history which are there, right? So there is one history which is based on the literary sources. But the moment you can find the uses of archaeological sources started increasing, and then there was a parallel history started coming into existence, that's called as the archaeology, that's called as the history based on the archaeological sources. So the parallel history जो है लिखी गई, and because of, and sometimes these two parallel histories had been giving or had been providing or had been giving a sort of two opposite picture of any particular period. And that's how it became more and more confusing in it. Such as let's take any example. We can take so many examples are there. Let's say for the sake of example we are taking the post-modern period, right? We are taking the post-Mauryan period. Now if you see the post-modern period, according to the literary sources, it was a period for the Brahminical revivalism. This I had been mentioning just now when I was talking about the Singley text. I told you that they have presented the postmodern period as a revival of Brahmanism. Hoga bhi, at one hand, a ruler like Asoka who had been trying to do everything for popularization of or for popularizing Buddhism. On the other hand, you'll find that most of the postmodern rulers had been following various sects of Hinduism, and in fact, there are a couple of rulers they had been charged or blamed for suppressing Buddhism, such as Pusimitra Sung. It has been blamed on him that he assassinated or killed so many Buddhist monks. He dismantled several Buddhist institutions and all. This kind of blames were there. Even the other literary sources, such as uh, when you read the writings by Patanjali, either you say about Yoga Sutra or Mahabhasya, yeah, Mahabhasya. In that case, he talks about these rulers being Brahminical or following Brahmanism, and in fact, they had been paying proper attention or they had been doing so many rituals and all. So Brahminical rituals and all, specifically the public rituals. So, both the informations are matching. That is the reason because of what now, this period has been portrayed as a period for the Brahminical revivalism. In fact, at one point of time, it was also believed that the Mauryan Empire declined because of this Brahminical revivalism. As Brahmins were very unhappy or highly unhappy with the approach of the Mauryan rulers, those who had been following always the heterodox sects rather than the popular one or the regular one. So that's how there was a reaction or retaliation by the people against the modern ruler. That kind of this is a kind of history which is there based on literary sources. But then once the archaeological sources were being referred a lot by those archaeologists or the historians, uh, there was a very different kind of history of it. Majority of the Buddhist monuments, shrines, sculptures that you find, it actually evolved during the postmodern period. Mauryan period, during the Mauryan period, unfortunately, architecture was not fully developed. So either they were made of the perishable material, or else they were so primitive in nature that they could not have survived for a longer period of time, and they could not have given the impression of being too grand. Fine, but then when you talk about the Buddhist architecture or Buddhist monument or Buddhist sculpture, you know that they are known for their grandness. Fine, either you talk about Sanchi or you talk about सारनाथ, भरूच, आप जहाँ के बारे में भी बात करते हैं, अल्टीमेटली आप देखते हैं कि वो सब अपनी जो है ग्रैंड उसके लिए प्रेजेंस के लिए जानी जाती है. सो इन विच पर्टिकुलर पीरियड इट प्रिसाइसली डेवलप इन पोस्ट मॉडर्न पीरियड. And in fact, there were no one but Satvahana rulers, the Sunga rulers, the Kanva rulers, those who had been patronizing all these things. In fact, it has been said for Pusmitra Sunga that he not only renovated the existing stupas. He even constructed so many new stupas also. Now, these informations have started proving one thing: actually, this period was not known only for the Brahminical revivalism, but Buddhism was also successfully getting great amount of patronization by these rulers. Now, as you can see, these two are presenting a very this is countering this idea. So, two very different image for the postmodern period of time. So, the question is naturally this: that how to rely on them. आप उस पे भरोसा मतलब how to incorporate them, and that is where if any such question is coming, in that case the way I did tell you that you can write that ultimately the best way of history writing is always the juxtaposition of sources. So you cannot rely precisely on one type of sources. Rather, you should always try to juxtapose the maximum amount of sources, how it changes the whole perception of any particular period. This is what I am willing to say. So that's why the question has been asked also, okay, how come the archaeological sources help in better understanding of the literary sources? And in fact, some other benefits are also there, because when it comes to literary sources, there might be n number of biases. Archaeological sources are also biased to a certain extent, but then it is undoubtedly not biased in the same way the way you find in the previous one. So this is how a comparative analysis of the sources is very important, or is one of the keys for history writing that you should always keep in mind. So I have just tried to include everything with respect to the sources, because I believe that these many informations were more than sufficient अगर कोई भी क्वेश्चन आ जाता है, so it is quite manageable. Fine. So that is all about the sources. Let's fine. So the next topic, is the in our syllabus is pre and the proto history. Now these two topics, these two phases, are, I can say, more or less ignored, right? And there are multiple reasons because of what, they are ignored. So when I talk about basically then pre and proto history, prehistory and the proto history, that majorly incorporates the Neolithic and the Chalcolithic period. So unfortunately, when it comes to the syllabus, so what they have given, the geographical factors, hunting and gathering, Paleolithic and Mesolithic, beginning of agriculture, Neolithic and Chalcolithic, that is being provided, or that is being given in the syllabus. Now look, when it comes to the Paleolithic and Mesolithic, right? When it comes to Paleolithic and Mesolithic, I think questions may not be asked ever on Paleolithic. And there is another reason because of what they are not emphasizing, or they are not asking so many questions from this part, that since in mapping area you can find that good number of sites are always been asked from this particular phase. That is one reason. And the second reason, there is no possibility of the question. अगर बनाना चाहे तो बना सकते हैं, but then normally there is no possibility of the question from this part. On the other hand, when it comes to Mesolithic, there is only possible topic is painting. So you all know that there is massive cave paintings we find in the Mesolithic period, and that may be one basis of the question, that how come these paintings are helpful in the in writing history of Mesolithic period. But then no, they haven't asked this question ever before, and you can see it from the from the questions only, right? So in 2023 they had asked one question about Neolithic age represented a revolution due to significant change that took place during this particular period, right? 2016 they asked one question, matlab 2016 matlab 23 they asked one question, and then 6 years, 7 years before they asked one question, delineate an account for the regional characteristics of the Neolithic period. Since they have asked this question in 2023, chances are very less that they are going to ask any question on this. But if the question is coming, there was no question from Mesolithic and Paleolithic period, right? So again, if any question is coming from this Neolithic, there are always two possibility of question. There is no third possibility. One is Neolithic revolution, and the second is about the regional distribution of the Neolithic cultures. If it comes to the first thing, that is Neolithic revolution, so it is a very popular topic. Everybody is having information on that. And what is revolution? Like revolution, matlab if any marginal, sorry, any substantial change that happens in a limited span of period, in that case we call it revolution. So beginning of agriculture is considered to be one of the revolutionary change. That's why it has been called as the revolutionary period by Gordon Child, the Australian archaeologist. Fine. But then there is so much a problem, and in fact he talks about how come agriculture is coming, and then agriculture creates surplus and it brings further all these changes, and the life phase got drastically changed because of the coming of agriculture. But here he miscalculates one thing, and he ignores that this particular change might have taken a longer time, because the day they came to know about agriculture, they may not be from the next day only, they won't be dependent completely on agriculture. Rather, to reach to that stage where they could rely completely only on agriculture, that must have consumed greater amount of period of the time. That is the reason because of what we can say, it is not revolutionary. Then rest of the people, some other scholars such as Robert Braidwood is there, then Hilly Flank is there, right? Then Louis Binford is there. All these people have refused this idea, and they talked about some other factors might be also responsible because of what the life ways are changing drastically, and that's the reason because of what they have rejected this idea of calling it revolutionary. That is the thing. And in fact, this is the idea which actually drives you further, that if we'll talk about the Neolithic transition, it does not happen only in one place in the world, which is mostly argued by this fellow, Gordon Child, Gordon V. Child, that it happened precisely in the West Asian region. and then he gives this oasis theory and all. That was not acceptable to many, and they said actually it was happening in multiple nuclear zones of the world. In fact, if we'll talk about India itself, within India, there were 6 or 7 zones where, which were going through this particular transition, such as northwestern part. You can talk about Mehergarh, the northern part of India, that is Burjahom and Gufkara. Then the central part of India, where Mahadaha, Chiran, and all these places are there. Then in the eastern part of India, you find. Then the northwestern, Daujali, Hading, Meghalaya, and then some other places it is happening. Then in south also, in the Karnataka and Andhra region, you find that this transition was taking place. So there were multiple regions in India where this transition was happening in different time period. It was happening, and in fact, it is the process was also not similar. Somewhere, somewhere agriculture is the primary thing. Somewhere tools are the primary thing because of what we believe they entered into Neolithic phase. Cultural differences were there. The domesticated crops and the animals, they were also different. Somewhere it is wheat, somewhere it is barley, somewhere it is rice, right? So different crops were being domesticated by them. So these kind of things clearly show that there were regional differences, and that's how we divide them into these regional zones. And the South Indian Neolithic, which is known as the Asmount sites, that is also a very different thing. So that is the reason because of what we reject this idea of revolution. And that, as I told you, that brings to the second topic also, the regional differences. So in the Neolithic, there was so many regional differences also. So there are a very lesser number of questions being asked from this side. On the other hand, if you see the Chalcolithic, last they asked in 2017 one question. So frankly speaking, in this year you can expect one question, either one question from the Chalcolithic only. Why am I saying this? Because megalithic, normally you can find that Neolithic, Chalcolithic and megalithic. These are three topics. From there they have been asking one question, and it is not necessary that in every year they have to ask one question from this particular part. So maybe out of these three, one question may be asked, right? So since 2017 they have asked last question on Chalcolithic. So this year you may expect, because last year there was a question from megalithic. So you can expect one question, but it is not necessary. So when it comes to Chalcolithic, again I would like to get you some basic idea of the Chalcolithic, because that basic understanding can help you. Okay, fine. So when it comes to Chalcolithic, this you should understand with respect to couple of words. There is one Chalcolithic that must be called as Harappan Chalcolithic. Another one is known as non-Harappan Chalcolithic. And then there was one more which is known as Copper Ode cultures. So when it comes to Chalcolithic, what you need to remember, there are three different kind of Chalcolithic cultures in India. Fine. One by one, let me tell you their significance. When it comes to the Harappan Chalcolithic, okay. So when it comes to the Harappan Chalcolithic, fine. Now, which is this Harappan Chalcolithic culture? There are two stages of Harappan civilization which could be kept in the Harappan Chalcolithic. One stage is the early Ibis, right? And the next one is the late IBC. These two could be kept in the category of these two could be kept in the category of the Harappan Chalcolithic, right? So the point is this: ki why? Just a second. Okay, fine. Sorry. So yes, early IBC, that is the phase immediately before the mature phase. What is the specific feature of the mature phase? Because of what it becomes a mature? There are multiple reasons, but there is one reason, that they had started using the bronze. Fine. If you'll see the early IVC, in that case, either they were not using bronze, and if they had been using, they were so scarce or limited that we cannot keep it in the category of bronze age culture. So in that case, if they were only using copper, which was locally available, what they must be getting from Rajasthan or the Khetri region, in that case, it was also a Chalcolithic culture. But since the other name of this Chalcolithic culture, that is the early IVC, is so popular, because in terms of features, it is very different from the Chalcolithic cultures what you find in the western side of India, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh, and even the other Chalcolithic cultures that you find in UP, Bihar, and Bengal region. That is how it has been called as early IVC, because it was more suitable rather than any other name. Fine. At the same time, when you see the decline of the mature phase of IVC, and it again enters into a ruralized stage, at that point of time also, it somehow could not manage to get the tin from the other parts of, like in the West Asia, that it could, like get copper, or it could get the bronze, and that's how again started relying heavily on copper. That's how again it converts into a Chalcolithic culture. So that is also, or these are also the Chalcolithic cultures, but since we know them as early IVC and the late IVC, and that's how we, like study them under these kind of subheadings, right? We never talk about the Chalcolithic cultures, and that's how, like questions were not asked on the Harappan Chalcolithic cultures, and that's why when the questions are being asked, it has been precisely mentioning the non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures. Now I hope you must be understanding why precisely it is being addressed as non-Harappan Chalcolithic culture. Because if they are writing only Chalcolithic culture, it means that it is incorporating all three, which is not acceptable. Fine. So it is like the late and early IBC. So this we are rejecting. Fine. ये हटा देते हैं इसको. Let's move to the next part. Now this is the Harappan Chalcolithic, non-Harappan Chalcolithic. So when it comes to the non-Harappan Chalcolithic, what are the specific features of the non-Harappan Chalcolithic? So that you find in the western side of India. Western side of India. I have already told you that they are mostly present in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Rajasthan. Fine. And in fact, we come to know about these non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures with the help of multiple kind of sources, such as there are so many archaeological excavations. So you might have heard of so many cultures such as Ahar or Gillan culture, then Jorwe culture. Then you talk about certain Daimabad culture, then there was several such cultures which are there in the western side of India. इन्हीं तीन regions पे वो है, ठीक है. And there are some very popular sites such as Balathal, Kaitha. Kaitha is also one culture. Then Navadatoli, Inamgaon, Prakash, Nasik, Daimabad. Out of these two, out of these cultures, at least couple of sites are very important. They are Inamgaon, Navadatoli, and Daimabad. And in fact, you should always try to refer them while writing any answer on the non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures. Okay? These are those sites which were excavated. There are multiple sites excavated, and in fact, Basant Sinde, one of the leading archaeologists of India, and Dhavlikar, These are two major archaeologists, those who are involved or indulged in the excavation of these chalcolithic sites. Fine. Apart from this, there is something which is also very important, source to know about this is about their pottery. And the potteries were undoubtedly, they were they had been using the black and red pottery. Keep in mind that they continued with the same Harappan pottery. They continued with basically a different side of they continued with a different sort of way, I mean to say pottery, that is black and red, which is equivalent to the potteries being used by the Neolithic communities in India. Fine. So it's different. And then when it comes to the copper culture, copper hood cultures, they had been using a different kind of pottery that is known as basically OCP, Ostre colored pottery, right? So these three cultures were kept different, right? Or they have been studied differently, but because they had been using different sort of different sort of pottery, right? So potteries are how important to understand these chalcolithic cultures. I hope now you must be realizing it. And this is the reason because of what once they asked this question that how come the potteries are helpful in studying the chalcolithic cultures. I have been just telling you one basic thing for it, right? So now on the basis of this, there had been several other things for also being understood, such as the size, type, color. They are indicating towards several things, right? If you find the bigger, let's say pottery, you find the bigger pottery, it means that it must be used for the storage jar. If they are present, it means that their agriculture was sound, right? And if their agriculture was sound, it means that they were in a stage to grow further or develop further. They were in a stage to enter into the next phase, or the bronze age, or let's say the urban age, right? That possibility is there. And if you do not find these kind of potteries, in that case you can deprive, or you can believe that these kind of things were not possible for them. That's how you can think of it. So this is how I can say the potteries are also very useful for knowing about them. There were certain elements or certain potteries which were not locally being used, rather it seems that they were they were probably borrowed from outside or imported from outside. That shows that how the potteries are how the chalcolithic cultures were even having interaction with the outer cultures. That's how they were having some sort of exchanges with those cultures outside of their premises. Okay, fine. So this is how we can say that is also one important aspect what they highlight. So potteries are very useful to study about them. Then apart from that, since they had been using copper, so their metallurgical studies are also helpful in understanding these cultures. Then we also talk about the subsistent pattern, what we find in the excavation. That is also something which is giving various information. I cannot, I don't want to complicate it because I'm not supposed to become the archaeologist, but I should say when you find the circular huts, basically that shows the primitive culture. When you find the rectangular or this square side of huts, it is showing slightly developed. I hope you can understand कि it is easy to make circular huts, right? Because roof डालना उसके ऊपर आसान है, लेकिन अगर आप जो है rectangular घर बना रहे हैं, in that case putting a roof over it is bit tough. That is the reason because of what initially the primitive cultures were making circular huts, right? And that too we find that the chalcolithic huts were in a cluster. In a cluster. So in a particular premise, you can find 4 5 such huts were there, and there was only one hearth, that is chulha, was being used by them. So it was indicating towards a sort of tribal culture, because normally in a developed culture you can find that every house is having a hut, which is not followed or not seen in the chalcolithic cultures. So these are various things which are indicating towards on this culture, and that's the reason because of what we can say that these sources provide us the insight on the chalcolithic cultures, right? Yes, one more thing should be included here, that is about the burial practices, because they had several burial practices, and in fact the diversity in the burial practice do indicate towards certain things, right? So this is one thing that you need to understand for the the non-Harappan chalcolithic culture. On the other hand, when it comes to copper hood culture, so understand this point. Either you talk about the Harappan chalcolithic or non-Harappan chalcolithic cultures, since they had a source of copper pretty close to them, and that's how they were easily getting the copper from them. But then it is not true for the cultures what we see here. Now, in the recent times, there is a new idea that has been said. Actually, the cultures, Chalcolithic cultures, what you find in UP, Bihar, and Bengal region, they were not getting their copper from the Khetri mines of Rajasthan. Rather, they were getting the copper from some of the copper mines in Jharkhand region, right? Now, it has not been proved fully, but then historians believe that since they had scars of copper or lacuna, or they did not have easy access to the copper, and that's so they were not massively using copper, unlike the Harappan and non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures. Fine. So this is how you should see them. Okay, fine. Now, when it comes to the question, it may be asked on non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures, not on copper hoard, not even on this one, right? Why? Because when it comes to the copper hoard culture, it is one of the cultures which had been lesser studied. In fact, very limited information we do have right now in last one decade. In fact, frankly speaking, from 2010 onwards, now several archaeologists have become very active in the eastern part of India, and they have been studying about them. Otherwise, there was no information provided, or no information we had. तो हमारे पास इंफॉर्मेशन किसके लिए है? सिर्फ नॉन हरप्पन चारकोलिथिक कल्चर के लिए है. तो क्वेश्चंस भी ज्यादातर उसी के ऊपर बेस्ड होते हैं. Now, the moment you see the non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures, it should be seen as a phase of transition. Understand this point very carefully. Non-Harappan Chalcolithic culture. One thing you should always keep in mind, that non-Harappan Chalcolithic culture should always been studied with respect to one word, that is transition. Fine. I'll make it more clear, don't worry. Okay. Look, if we'll see a normal growth of cultures, in that case, I'll find stone, copper, from stone to copper to bronze, and then iron. Fine. This is an accepted notion for the development in metallurgy, or development in the cultures with respect to the metals they had been using. Fine. The whole idea of saying this, that Harappan civilization was a borrowed one, it was based on this idea that the Harappans had been using bronze. How come it is possible that immediately before they had been using stone, and from stone the natural growth should be in this way, that they started using copper first and then the bronze? So the Western scholars claim that since the Harappan civilization started using the bronze directly, it is clearly indicating that actually they had they started using bronze directly. They like, they are willing to say basically it is not a natural growth. But then this idea has been rejected. On what ground? Because I told you about the early IBC, which was using copper. So since early IBC had been using copper, तो idea तो reject. ठीक है. So we have just stopped talking about that. तो ये तो बंद कर देते. ठीक है. Now, when you talk about this non-Harappan Chalcolithic culture, it is showing a sort of gradual transition. It has been showing a gradual transition from the Stone Age to an urban phase in the other parts of India. Because when it comes to this particular growth, we have seen it in the northwestern part of India. So since it is already there it was there in the northwestern part of India, so it doesn't mean that in the other parts of India this kind of evolution or the transition were not taking place? No, it is incorrect. It was very much taking place even in, the other Chalcolithic regions. So basically there was certain very old, Neolithic sites have been found in Maharashtra. There are a couple of places such as Patne, right? Or all these places are there. And in these Bori is there, Patna is there. These are very old, prehistoric sites. And the way you find that it has been transforming or transcending from the Stone Age to the Chalcolithic age, that is how it was also going through a transition. So the period of this Chalcolithic culture is roughly between, I can say, that 2000 BC to, I must say, 300 or 400 BC. That is the period where you find the different cultures. So basically, it also tells you a journey of a transition from Stone Age to Stone Age to Copper Age, and Copper Age to further Bronze Age. But before it could have entered into the Bronze Age, due to some other developments in rest of the part of India, India enters into the historical age, and that's how this journey remained incomplete. That's how you should understand. So you know that when it was at one hand it was going on the other hand the Aryan enters into India, and then they bring they bring a different culture in India, and that's how India enters into the historical age, because now you see the foundation of this Mahajanapada and so on. Iron was discovered in north, with the help of iron. Some state formation process even took place in this western part of India. This is the process which is going on, right? But then this question had been asked once by UPSC, that whether these non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures had the potential to emerge as an urban stage or not. Frankly speaking, yes, they did have the potential. And I told you in the beginning that you should refer Daimabad, Inamgaon, these sites, because these sites clearly convey that they had the potential. And in fact, this is the culture which appeared towards late. So when you talk about Ahar culture, it is the oldest one. But when you talk about the culture what you see in Maharashtra region, that is the newest one. And in fact, they had all those signs that we can claim or we can conclude they had all this potential to transform into an urban stage. Fine. Now, how do we claim so? Basically, we claim so on the basis of the various evidences that we find. So, among their evidences, we can say that they had a political structure, right? Such as political structure. On what ground we claim that they had a political structure? Such as there is one site in Maharashtra that's called as Balatal. Okay. Sorry, Rajasthan. That is in Balatal. So you can find that there is a presence of organized governance. Okay. Whenever you find some sort of fortification, or whenever you find a bigger house in a particular locality or a settlement, in that case, it means that there was a ruling power or controlling power. Fine. In the same way, we can find Inam Gaon, that the way I did tell you that the settlement was very large. The population which was living in this particular area was very high, very high. And in fact, here, as I told you, that some sort of fortification signs is noticeable here. So on the basis of that, we say yes, they had a political structure. So whenever any society is having a political structure, it means that it has come to the next stage of development. That is how it was having like this. Okay, that is one point that you should keep in mind. So yes, they were providing information on the political structure, right? Next, we can say that they even had the social stratification. And one thing you'll always keep in mind, that the words that or the terminologies what I have been using, you should always keep them you have to you have to keep an eye over them, as these are the terms what you are going to use in your answer writing. What is the social stratification, how do you see the social stratification? Just now I told you that there are a couple of in a particular settlement, majority of the houses were smaller. On the other hand, some big houses are also present, such as, for example, we can take the case of Daimabad, right? In Daimabad we find a larger house which had multiple rooms, right? And in fact, the grave goods within here, you can find that they were also richer. So that proves that ultimately there was a difference in the society. Now, in the absence of literary sources, we can always talk about the class difference. We cannot talk about the caste difference. That is not possible. At the same time, we can talk about their economy, which was also flourished. So probably in the initial Chalcolithic cultures, you find that their economy was precisely based, or it was a subsistent economy. But then it does not remain always a subsistent economy. Rather, it is also focusing on the surplus creation, right? such as in Ahar culture, you won't find that they had the sign of surplus creation. But the moment you'll go to basically this culture, like the Maharashtra culture, the Jorve culture and all. So there you can find that they have like all those bigger jars and then like storage jars and all. So that proves that actually their agriculture became developed. This is the reason because of what they were capable of capable of producing surplus and storing it. We find that they had been producing barley, wheat, rice, millets, and so on, right? At the same time, we can find that their craft production was also well developed. The way I was discussing about pottery, like then I was talking about basically their copper tools, and there was like one region that's called as Ganeswa Jodhpura, which is in Rajasthan. That shows that they had an expertise in making the copper tools and the copper objects. Even Inamgaon does present the various kind of ceramic styles. So on the basis of that, we can see that their craft activities were very much developed. Now, what is more important to be noticed here, that some non-local materials are also found here, which proves that they must be having their interaction with the outer cultures that I had been discussing slightly before also, right? So we can say that these culture and in fact social differences I have talked about, right? The way I told you that the houses were very different, and in fact it shows some sort of class differences and all, right? The settlement pattern basically. So that's how we can say in this this culture was also having the was in a direction to grow further, right? It was in a direction to grow further, and it was it might have converted into urban phase, right? Because we can say that their religion was also becoming complex over the period. Initially it was simple, but then it was gradually becoming complex. So that's how we can say these cultures had all these signs of growing further. So probably if it would not have entered into the historical age, in that case probably there might be another phase where they would have entered into the bronze age and further the iron age. That's how we can have seen. There is one more possibility of question in this part. It has not been asked before, that if any question is coming on Harappan and Chalcolithic cultures relation, इस तरीके के इनोवेटिव क्वेश्चंस लोग बहुत पूछ रहे हैं आजकल. So you should be ready for this part. I'm emphasizing on Chalcolithic. I have already given you the logic because of what I have been emphasizing on Chalcolithic. The way I did tell you, that's since they have asked question on the Neolithic and Megalithic, so possibility is there that they might ask a question, or they may ask a question on Chalcolithic, right? So now the point is that it seems that they were quite, what to say, uh, we can say they were quite parallel. Okay? If they were parallel, in that case, what sort of relationship was there? Fine. Look, we cannot call them completely parallel. I told you that the real development of Chalcolithic culture started happening only once Harappa was about to or on the verge of decline. Right? So the period of Harappan civilization, the mature phase of Harappan civilization, was existing between 2600 BC to 1900 BC. That is the period. On the other hand, the real development in the Chalcolithic culture you can find only after 1900, precisely speaking after 1500, right? So we can say yes, there was a time gap between the two. So that is one thing that you should keep in mind. It is not true that they were parallel, rather a substantial amount of time gap is there. But it does not mean that the Harappan culture in general, if you include the late Harappan culture, it was not parallel. Of course, if you see the whole Harappan culture, then it was like parallel. So if we'll talk about the whole Harappan culture, in that case, there was a trade and exchange relationship between the two. How it is possible? Well, I told you the Harappans were getting their copper from the Rajasthan region, and it was the same region where this Ahar or Gilland culture was there. It is also called as the Ganeshwar and Jodhpura culture. So these are certain sites, Ganeshwar, Jodhpur and all in Rajasthan. So understand this point. At one hand, you'll find the Harappans were there, and they were getting the copper from Rajasthan or this region, which is close to this Ahar and Gilun culture. But then you should also keep in mind, because the next question may be asked, if they were knowing about each other, in that case, why there is so much difference or substantial amount of difference between the between, I can say, this culture, the Harappan culture and the Ahar and Gilun culture. Because at one hand, you'll find that Ahar and Gilun culture remains in a very primitive stage, and you know about the Harappan civilization. So look, urbanization or these kind of developments do not rely precisely on one fact or one thing, that is the knowledge of each other, right? Actually, several resources were needed, and at that point of time, the Ahar and Gilun culture, right, have not reached or has not reached to that stage. Because if it is in Rajasthan, it means that they had problem in the creation of surplus. Take it. But does it mean that there were no influence to each other? That also we cannot accept. If they were knowing about each other, in that case, certain influences must be there. And specifically, what sort of influences we can talk about? We can talk about the technological influences. Okay? Technological influences. So that is why we can say that some technological influences were definitely there between the two, but then it was not they were not the mirror image. Undoubtedly, there were so many differences. Yes, we can say that after the decline of the mature Harappan, decline of mature Harappan, we find the migration of some Harappans even into these Chalcolithic cultures. So we can say the transition and the migration, that is also one important thing. So we can say that actually there are so many different kind of relationship existing between the Harappan and the Chalcolithic cultures. So and in fact, that there was some substantial amount of difference. So I don't need that you need my help to write about the differences, because there was substantial amount of differences in the material culture of the two. One material culture was very rich, one is very poor. In fact, their religion, their society, their polity, everything Harappan was fully developed. On the other hand, you do not find that these many differences were there of of these Chalcolithic cultures. Okay. Now, if you really wish to mention certain uh, scholars, in that case, you just remember few names, such as one I told you. He is that professor of that is Basant Sinde, then M.K. Davlikar. Now, anywhere you can just mention the DHAVA, sorry, M.K. Davlikar, right? So you can write M.K. Davlikar. These two, historians are sufficient. Not historians, precisely speaking, they were archaeologists, and in fact, they have worked majorly on these Chalcolithic cultures. That is all about this Chalcolithic cultures. Nothing else I need to cover. So, okay, fine. Let's move to the next topic. I think that's all about this Chalcolithic culture. So, let's move towards this. Okay, fine. So, the next topic is very important. That is IVC. So, if you see the okay, if we'll see the syllabus, in that case, you'll find that what are the terms they have used: origin, date, extent, characteristics, decline, survival, significance, art and architecture. I don't know why you guys never focus on the syllabus, because your questions are always reflecting the syllabus, right? Now, these are the various terms. Origin, it is one topic. Dating is one topic. So far, not a single question has been asked precisely on dating. Extent is one dimension. Again, the question has not been asked. There are multiple dimensions in the characteristics. Multiple dimensions in the characteristics, right? Decline is one topic. Regular questions are being asked. Survival, they have asked question on this also. They have asked the question on this art and culture also. Significance is one thing, they haven't asked the question on this, right? So basically, if we'll see, so the Harappan civilization, in that case, the kind of questions being asked, they are nothing doing nothing but reflecting the syllabus only. But then when you study Harappan civilization, you mostly focus on what? You mostly focus on couple of dimensions, and you ignored so many dimensions here, right? Let's see. When it comes to decline, survival, and significance. Okay? So yes, on regular intervals, they ask question on decline, such as 2015, then 2021, they ask this question. Now, urban process and features, when it comes to this part, the characteristics, that is a very important area. And in fact, they have started asking several questions now on this part, right? Now, decline is important. I'm not denying it, right? You should prepare, but then there's nothing new to prepare in the decline. You know that there are a couple of theories, couple of archaeologists. That's it. Nothing else you need to write. So anybody can write the answer on decline. But then they have started asking the question, innovative questions on this part, and you should be ready for these kind of questions, right? Let's see these questions little bit that can get you some idea. Last year they asked one question that Harappan art contributes to our understanding of their aesthetic sensibilities in addition to the spiritual and ritualistic life. As far as the second part of this question is concerned, that you study, you know that if you know Harappan religion or Harappan art forms, you can connect the two, because ultimately both are quite similar. But then they have been asking one more question, and they have been asking how Harappan art contributes to our understanding of their aesthetic sensibilities. This is what they have asked, right? They have their aesthetic sensibilities, right? This is what has been asked. Now, it is a debate, right? That is why this question has been asked. Now, we may prepare the Harappan art. Ki, haan, bhai, they have been making the images. They are having certain architectural patterns. They are having so many other things. ठीक है, bronze hai, jewelries hai, वो सब पता है हमें, ठीक है. But then this is a debate which is talking about whether they had aesthetic sense in their art forms or not. So this is one part, what they have asked. Now, this is a very new dimension they have asked the question. So you can't take it in this way that the PYQs are always being repeated. This is a great misconception. Of course, there is some impression. Of course, the themes are being repeated, but it does not mean that they have been asking the exactly same thing. Okay. In 2023, last to last year, I asked this question: Indus Saraswati Cultural Zone exhibits both homogeneity and diversity. And now again, there is a greater meaning of this particular question: homogeneity and diversity. So when you talk about this Indus Saraswati cultural zone, first of all, when they are calling it Indus Saraswati cultural zone, it is itself a new pattern. Now we do not call it only Indus civilization, because it has been questioned by many archaeologists that if it was spread in such a larger region, in that case, how come we can call it Indus region or Indus civilization only? So they have questioned it, right? Okay, anyway, this question is not about that. But then just now I was telling you that actually the Chalcolithic cultures which were there are prevailing in Rajasthan region, they were also having some sort of connections. And then it is asking, okay, how come this zone was exhibiting both homogeneity and diversity? Now, this whole concept is based on the newer perception on Harappan civilization. And what is it? It's very simple that when we studied Harappan civilization, we always emphasize on one thing, that is homogeneity. And we never talked about the heterogeneity or the differences which they had. Why did we focus a lot on homogeneity? Again, there is a very simple reason, because we focused a lot on the homogeneity only for this reason, because we needed to glorify this culture. Fine. Since we always had a sort of like a sort of a literary what to say competition going on with the Western scholars. So Western scholars always wanted to show their greatness, their the way they were advanced in the development of material culture, and they always sideline the Indians or marginalize the Indian civilization. So in order to counter those arguments, we have started or we developed this trend of glorifying Harappan civilization, that it was such a great civilization which was homogeneous. And if you prove it homogeneous, in that case, you might have proved the political excellence and then the social uniformity and so many other things, right? That's how this trend got developed. But what is the recent trend in the study of Harappan civilization? That no, not only the homogeneity, of course, homogeneity was there, but then this homogeneity was overemphasized or exaggerated many times. Now they have started emphasizing even on the differences or let's say diversity. Such as, I'm giving you a couple of examples to make you understand it better. Such as when it comes to Dholavira. Now, most of the Harappan cities got divided into two parts. Dhalavira got divided into three parts. There is a middle part also. There is a middle city also. Now, you cannot skip this part by writing that Dhalavira had three divisions. Now, if Dhalavira had three divisions, it should be studied why this particular city had three divisions, right? It makes it very specific if it really had three divisions, right? So that is how we can talk about the political differences, cultural differences. Mostly we can talk about the cultural and cultural and some other sort of material difference. So basically it is the new trend where we have been talking about these differences, and as I told you that we can find diversity in a range of patterns of their life. That is how this question. So this is again a new question that has never been asked before, that it was asked. The next question, the next, like 1 year before only, the urban character of Harappan civilization was the result neither of any outside influence nor a sudden act, but a gradual evolution of the religion socio-economic factor. Now, this question is talking about the gradual evolution of IVC, which is against the concept of the the migration theory. That is okay, but at the same time, it is connecting you with the religio-socio-economic factor. It means that Harappan evolution was not merely right. It was not merely the result of the surplus production, which was argued by God and Child. Rather, it was also the result of the production of it was the result of some religious socio factors also. So when you talk about urbanization, or yeah, precisely let us talk about urbanization only. If we'll talk about urbanization, it is not directly or deeply connected with just one thing, economic surplus. Rather, some other factors are also contributing here, and it has been asking you to write about this. I don't know whether you know about this or not, but yes, there were there were so many factors which were there. Did the mastery over agriculture act as a leverage for the rise of Harappan town and cities? Like related question. It is precisely talking about the mastery over agriculture. It means that they were capable of creating the agricultural surplus, and that's how they had been doing it. That is the core idea. This question is saying not only this, rather the socio-economic socio-religious factors were also contributing for the evolution of Harappan civilization. So if we'll see only this last questions in 5 6 years, the last year's uh, 2023, I guess this question was there. Yes, 2023 or 23. So you can find that now they have started asking so many innovative questions on IVC. That is what and that is how you should prepare this particular topic. So you can't prepare it very lightly. Yeah, ठीक है यार, Harappan civilization है, पढ़ लेंगे, भाई decline पढ़ लेंगे, origin पढ़ लेंगे, and then town planning पढ़ लेंगे. This is the time to go beyond this. ठीक है. So this is a change in the pattern that we should understand while studying Harappan civilization, right? So I think there is no point of getting into Harappan civilization today, because we won't be able to finish this. Let's do it in tomorrow's class. So tomorrow we'll finish Harappan civilization. Now this is a larger topic. It can consume some time. थोड़ा वक्त लगेगा इसको खत्म करने, but of course one class, not more than one class, will be able to finish it, right? So let's meet tomorrow then, and we'll finish this Harappan civilization. थोड़ा सा इधर स्पीड कम है, बट देन ग्रेजुअली विल मैनेज द स्पीड, लाइक वंस विल गेटिंग इनटू द अदर पीरियड्स, बिकॉज मौर्यन एंड ऑल, तो वहाँ पे इतने कॉन्सेप्चुअल टॉपिक्स नहीं होंगे, तो या होंगे भी तो कम होंगे, तो थोड़ा उस पर फोकस करते हैं. ओके, थैंक यू वेरी मच. Let's meet tomorrow to continue it further. Thank you very much.